Our final panel will be a discussion amongst scholars, policy experts, and leaders in the field of conservation. First, let me introduce Texan by nature Vice President of the Board of Directors, Tina Buford, who will moderate our panel, and Lynn Scarlett, Managing Director of Public Policy at the Nature Conservancy, who will join Dr. Howard Frumkin for this discussion. Tina Buford is a strong leader at Texan by Nature. In addition to continuing her family's legacy of working the land through commercial cattle and hunting operations, she was the first female president of the Texas Wildlife Association and now serves as the Education Project Manager at the East Foundation. She was also recently appointed to the Governor's Commission for Women and is a director of the Sand County Foundation. Lynn Scarlett joins us from the Nature Conservancy after serving as Deputy Secretary of the U.S. Department of the Interior. She co-chaired Laura Bush's Preserve America initiative and currently chairs the Science Advisory Board of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. So, when we were working on this, trying to figure out what's the best way to tell the story and to ensure that we had an outcome that really produced results. I don't have doctor before my name, but I'm very passionate about our natural resources. And I understand I'm one of those that has it in my gut that being out in nature does something for me. It is a positive influence on my life, and it's one that I hope to be able to share with all the children and adults alike. So just a couple of statistics. According to the U.S. Census Bureau study in 2013, Texas has 7 of the 15 most rapidly growing cities in the nation. From 1997 to 2012, Texas population grew by 36%. So because of this growth, we experienced a net loss of 1.1 million acres of working lands. So you ask, what's working lands and why is it relevant? Working lands that not only produce food and fiber, but the open spaces provide clean air, clean water, wildlife habitat, as well as the place for all Texans to get out and enjoy nature. So as Mrs. Bush explained earlier, Texan by Nature's vision is that all Texans share a conservation ethic that ensures Texas' economic vitality and heritage by conserving our natural resources. This is no small challenge. So populations across the globe will continue to rise. Growth and infrastructure to support that growth is inevitable. Choices will be made in both our urban and our rural communities on how that growth takes place. So where does conserving our natural resources rank in the scheme of things? Those that have the responsibility to make decisions that affect our quality of life are no doubt weighing those options. So the truth is, science and the hard data derived from the research that's heard today and what is to come will influence that decision and it will drive whether or not we rank the conservation of our natural resources high on the list of our priorities. So with that, I would ask our panelists to come forward, and they have some remarks to share with you, and then we're going to open it up to the audience.
Tina, thank you very much. I need to apologize because really it should be Lynn who goes first with any concept of chivalry, but I have to leave early. You see, since I became a dean at University of Washington, I have a special arrangement with United Airlines. If I'm running late for a flight, they go ahead and take off. So I will make a few remarks and then I'll gracefully slip out. And I want to make three remarks. I want to speak to personal issues, I want to speak to scientific issues, and then finally to policy issues. And by finishing with policy issues, I hope to set the stage for one of my favorite insightful policy experts who will follow. On the personal side, I want to put in a plea for being uncomfortable, getting outside our comfort zones. You heard a little bit of evidence of this morning. You heard a great cardiologist talk about how over the last 5 years of doing research in stress, he has found that his assumptions have been upended repeatedly. You heard a soldier give a terrific presentation, and on the very last slide of that presentation, the words gentle and love appeared. Not what you necessarily would expect in a soldier's presentation. Two examples of people crossing boundaries, getting outside their comfort zone, taking the most comprehensive look that they can at a complex challenge. I want to urge all of us to have the courage to get outside our comfort zones, because if we're to carry this work forward and think broadly and synthetically, that's what we're going to have to do, overcoming the limits of our training and what we're accustomed to. Second, the scientific issue. One of the tensions that was inherent in the discussion today was, at what scale does nature contact take place? In some ways, the vast, iconic, beautiful landscapes are the symbol of land conservation, and you saw those on the background slides, and that was no mistake. On the other hand, as we heard, more than 50% of people live in cities, and for most of us, our daily encounters with nature take place on a much smaller scale than the vast landscapes. They take place as we walk down the block, or duck into a park, or maybe even just see plants in our offices or homes. So where are our laboratories? Where do we need to do the research that will help clarify the association between nature contact and health, help us understand the mechanisms, help us determine what means of nature contact are most beneficial for health and well-being? Where are our laboratories? Are they in the cities or are they the countryside? And how do we reconcile the traditional ethos of land conservation with the ways in which many people encounter nature these days? Third, on policy. I'm going to make two statements. They are incompatible with each other, and they're both true. The first statement is, we know a lot about the association between nature contact and health. The second statement is, there's an awful lot we don't know about the association between nature contact and health. That's a balancing act. As you translate science into policy, you're constantly faced with the question of, when do we know enough to act? Do we need to do more research first? Should we be cautious as we proceed? Or do we know enough to act, even studying results as we implement what we think we know? I would argue to you that we probably know enough to act, but we're building this airplane as we fly it. We need, as we implement means of nature contact, to be carefully evaluating those means, determining what works and what doesn't work, and then tweaking our interventions as we go. But I think we know enough that we can say that access to parks, access to green space, outdoor recess for children, outdoor adventures for veterans with PTSD probably are beneficial. And it's time to be thinking about program implementation even as we think about advancing the science. So a personal point, a plea for discomfort. A scientific point, a plea for thinking carefully and broadly about where we do this research in reconciling forms of land conservation with urban nature. And a policy point, thinking carefully about certainty and uncertainty and how we move forward even in the face of some residual uncertainty. I want to thank Texan by Nature, thank Houston Methodist, thank all of you for the work that you do, and apologize to Lynn for abandoning her on this stage.
Good afternoon. It is a tremendous pleasure for me to participate in this forum, and like Howie, I would like to thank Houston Methodist and Texan by Nature for convening this endeavor. I think it is incredibly important. As I contemplated the presentations this morning, one refrain kept coming to mind, and that is the following: nature is not just nice, it is essential. It's essential for human well-being along many dimensions, as we heard Howie Frumkin delineate in his opening presentation. Some of those dimensions are familiar: the physical benefits of outdoor recreation. Some are perhaps intuitive: nature's contribution to stress reduction, although there's a lot we need to know about just exactly why that is. Some are less immediately appreciated, for example, the relationship between nature and cognition. I'm still working on that math and letters problem. And also, as Dr. Frumkin noted, there is just so much more. As the presenters noted, nature matters to health. There's much that we've learned. There's much research still to undertake. How, what, why, when? And then in that last panel, how do we fund? Who and with what funding models? But I actually want to take us in a somewhat different direction for a moment. What does the linkage of nature and health mean for conservation and investing in nature? After all, we won't have the benefits of nature if we don't have nature. So I want to delineate 4 thoughts in that regard, drawing from the presentations that we heard this morning. The first is the importance of urban greening. Nature is not just nature out there in Yosemite or Yellowstone. We love those places, but nature is in our backyard, and those backyards matter. We heard about the benefits of urban settings of nature for nature and health, but I want to add some other benefits to the mix. Greg alluded to these, so did Howie. The benefits that nature plays in providing other services to human communities. For example, the Nature Conservancy is right now working on a study looking at planting air quality. What is the relationship between trees, expanded tree canopy, and air quality, and of course the affiliated benefits that brings to human health? Can there be cost-effective ways to reduce air pollutant emissions? And then what about the important role in mitigating the urban heat island effect? We see the increase in the number of 90-plus degree days, whether it's here in Houston, whether it's in Chicago, whether it's in Tucson, whether it's in India, indeed across the globe. And the urban heat island effect, of course, the idea that cities are hotter than their surrounding areas. As those 90-degree days increase, the role of trees and their mitigation of that urban heat island effect may have increasing relevance. But urban trees and green space, as we heard alluded to, also help address stormwater runoff. That is, the more permeable surfacing we have, the water percolates downward, gets treated, if you will, by nature in the soils, and then flows, of course, to streams and elsewhere. The Nature Conservancy does a lot of work on that, and we also work on another dimension of nature's benefits, that is along coasts. The role of nature, for example, sea marshes, oyster reefs, et cetera, in wave attenuation and coastal protection. You in Houston know the challenges of high-intensity storms. You see potentially their increased frequency, and nature systems helps to reduce those risks, which ultimately, of course, is also about people's well-being. The bottom line, nature and health and other benefits are all important, and this becomes important when we think about public policy, when we think about investing in nature. Thinking about all of those benefits as a suite can change the cost-benefit dimensions or outcome of that analysis. But I want to offer a second thought, so the first being urban greening matters. The second thought about the implications of the nexus between health and nature, and that being the importance of access to nature for all communities. You heard Howie's comments, for example, on the relationship even of health benefits to lower income communities and the potential particular benefits there. So the need for access in urban areas, but access is not just about urban places. We do need enhanced access to wild places too, to those parks, to those refuges, to wildlife management areas. Indeed, during the 8 years I served at the Interior Department, I was delighted to see the Fish and Wildlife Service and other agencies actually working with the veterans communities, bringing folks in to have fishing experiences in those refuges. Those matter and we need them. That access comes in many forms and they're all important. But I want to turn to the third implication, and that is the relevance of the connectivity between city and countryside. As we think of investing in nature, as we think of the benefits of conservation for people and nature, it is not just about investments in cities or investments in those great grand parks or refuges. It's about connectivity, so folks can go in greenways, as you in fact have here in Houston, trying to connect cities with other places. That connectivity enhances access for a variety of nature experiences, not just that walk in the urban park, but perhaps the more vigorous exercise that might come from running along a trail. But I want to here again mention the benefits of the connection between nature in cities and nature in countryside. The Nature Conservancy around the world is now investing in watersheds that are critical to the water quality of cities. The first one we launched was in Quito, where rather than building additional mechanical treatment facilities, we worked with farmers, we worked with foresters to invest in enhancing the watershed health, and through that, reducing sedimentation, reducing the agricultural runoff, lowering the cost for treating that water, and of course that is about health. When you think, perhaps not so much in this country, but the developing countries where the Nature Conservancy and others work, one of the biggest challenges, in fact, is water quality. So investing in watersheds matters. Enhancing water quality through that investment in nature can be a critical component of that linkage between people and nature. And that then brings me to my fourth observation. Moving from the concept of nature as nice to nature as essential actually opens up the door to broader ways of thinking how we can invest in nature and how we can think about infrastructure and other policy dimensions that support a suite of values that we care about. Conservation and investing in nature is not just the purview of parks and park agencies. Indeed, as we've heard today, it's about the Department of Defense. It is about the Department of Agriculture. It is about the private sector. It is about many actors in the world around us. We need to transcend our siloed thinking about funding, transcend our thinking that if it's nature, we need it in the park budget, to think about what the benefits are and how those benefits might give rise to additional funding. Multiple benefits mean a potential role, for example, in urban infrastructure solutions. The Nature Conservancy's water funds that I mentioned, there we are using funds that come from water utility rates, and or in developing countries where they do not have water utilities, companies are paying for those investments. Why are companies paying for them? Because those companies need really clean water, and they perceive that the most cost-effective solution is to invest in nature, not necessarily in technological solutions. Stormwater is another case. 700 cities in the United States right now exceed stormwater management regulations in terms of sewage overflow. The cost of addressing those traditionally through pipes and tunnels is in the hundreds of billions of dollars. And so cities like Philadelphia, cities like Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, and elsewhere are putting on their thinking caps and instead investing in nature, taking stormwater utility fees, ordinarily that would have gone to pipes and tunnels, and putting them into nature. So there are many more opportunities for private sector investment in conservation as well. Here in Texas, the Nature Conservancy has partnered, for example, with Dow Chemical Company, partnered to explore with them nature solutions for air quality and also for coastal resilience. What those studies have shown is that for a company like Dow, planting trees can actually be a cost-effective way of achieving its air quality goals. We saw from Dr. Frumkin that companies are also investing in nature in the workplace. The Nature Conservancy now has, and over the last 3 or 4 years, a global urban program. And one of the things our research has shown, and by the way, we do have 500 scientists on board. We're one of the largest biological sciences organization in the world, I would say. Some of our studies have documented increases in productivity with green workplaces. By the way, both inside and outside. So it's not just trees, it's not just those small shrubs outside, but indeed greenery in the workplace as well. So better understanding those relationships between productivity and greening is a way then to have dialogue with companies and pull them into the solution mix so that we are relying on private sector funding for some of our greening, some of our investment in conservation, some of our investment in nature. So I want to just conclude so we have time for some dialogue. I think this conference is a tremendous context for identifying the links of nature and health, helping us think about the key research needs, going beyond the, I think it feels right that my stress is lower, to what are the mechanisms and how might we, in understanding those, better put them to work for us. Exploring, though, also the broadened understanding of benefits. I think it's important, as I noted, to think not only about nature and health, but then these broader benefits such as stormwater management, such as air quality, such as coastal resilience, because bringing that suite of benefits together simply is a way of better being able to coalesce funding sources from multiple places to help support those investments. So I'm going to conclude by saying that the Nature Conservancy's mission is now defined as conservation for the benefit of people and nature. And I think that is what this conference is all about. I commend those who have convened it. What a terrific event. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lynn. So before I open it up, I just had one quick question. You and I have had the opportunity to have some very organic discussions prior to this symposium, really helping us come together with a great agenda. And the role of science in informing public policy. I'd like you to speak a little bit more specifically about that, because I know that there are many that are in the audience that are within the medical community. And so to impress upon them that their work really has a role in shaping our public policy.
I'm going to give a slightly complicated answer to that. There is no question that scientific understanding must inform our policy decisions. It is that understanding that helps us see some of the connections we heard about this morning, and therefore helps us think about investing in those solutions and so forth. At the same time, and here's the more complicated part, we like to think, or we wish, that the connection between science and policy were as simple as doing a study, handing it over, the policymakers' light bulbs go on, eureka, now I understand what I should be doing and the decisions I should be taking. Alas, my 8 years at the Interior Department taught me that that was not necessarily such a straightforward pathway. But that's not necessarily bad news. What we have found is that linking science with experiential knowledge, that is, projects on the ground where we're doing stuff, where one can then actually see some of what it is that the science is showing, can really help people sort of pinpoint the possible, define the doable, and then get behind a solution set. So we need the science, we need that research. It's critical to understanding what is meaningful, what's not meaningful. At the same time, we also need those investments in, for example, stormwater management through greening, so people can see how this actually plays out, or see what happens, for example, when you take a veteran to the countryside and engage in a fishing program and what that does. So you need the whole package.
So in essence, quantitative and qualitative.
Yes.
We need to capture those. Well, now's the time. If there's anybody in the audience that would have a question for Lynn, we would love to entertain those. And again, just the microphone, we can either provide them or you can just raise your hand and stand up. We've got one in the back. Is there a microphone? Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm an environmental policy graduate student at the University of Denver. One of the things I've noticed throughout my research, especially with environmental assessments and environmental impact statements, is that a lot of the times these will come to conclusions that show that all these positive benefits, yet they don't really instigate action. So, ever since the Council on Environmental Quality was conceived in the early 70s, we have the building blocks, but why are the pieces not stacking together right? I know you kind of answered that already, but if you have anything else you could add.
So I think it's actually a little bit more of a mixed bag than perhaps that framing suggests. There's no question, having looked at environmental impact statements and looking at the work of the Bureau of Land Management or many, many other agencies at the state level and so forth, that those assessments have some impact. They do result, for example, sometimes in trying to offset a particular impact. But I would say there are two big challenges with the way those have been done historically. One, a lot of the kinds of benefits that we're discussing at this meeting are completely absent from the analysis at all. So, for example, historically, when the Army Corps of Engineers looked at coastal resilience and trying to enhance the safety of communities, they only would look at built infrastructure options, not, for example, at sea marshes and so on and so forth. And so in some respects, some of the benefits we're talking about were out of the picture, and therefore we don't see them expressed in the solutions taken. To some extent also, one of the challenges is a matter of scale. Sometimes the analysis is done in a tiny project scale and in a very bounded way, making it very, very difficult actually to get meaningful both analysis and offsets. So again, I'll give you an example from the Department of the Interior, Bureau of Land Management, oil and gas development. Often you'd look at a single site and show that there were maybe some impacts to some kind of vegetation, but then just replace that vegetation right at that place, which might not be the most beneficial and flourishing place to really invest in nature. So part of the challenge is how those are done. I think there's a desire to have those efforts be meaningful. At the same time, I guess, affirming some of your concepts, in many respects, a lot of those efforts have become sort of cookie cutter, just do it because we're supposed to do it, rather than asking what is the result we're trying to achieve.
Thank you. Any other questions? We have one right back there.
And by the way, if you don't raise your hand, I'll call on you, because I was a teacher at one point in my life.
This has been a fantastic meeting. I must say I showed up to learn how to plant milkweed and about wellness. I think you hit the nail on the head when you said it's all about interconnectivity and getting people to talk to each other. So my question is, Alan Lumsden mentioned pumps and pipes, and one of our slogans in Pumps and Pipes is the solution to my problem may very well be found in the other guy's toolkit. So my question to you is, what sectors, entities, people would you just love to talk to about this but have been unable to get that dialogue going? Because I think the people in this room may be able to help that.
Really good question.
Yeah, that is, I'm a perennial optimist, so I think there are many opportunities for those conversations. This conversation, this is one of the first I've ever seen really directed at a conversation between the medical community and those that are looking at nature and conservation. That's one intersection incredibly important. I can't tell you how many conservation convenings I've been at, including of many, many, many scientists, where these issues are talked about, i.e. their benefits to health from nature, but there's not a medical professional anywhere to be seen, or perhaps within 10 miles. So that's one important connection. The other, frankly, though, is really important connections between the conservation world and city planning and urban planning and architecture and urban design. You know, if the 20th century was a time of sort of taking nature out of cities, paving things over, perhaps thinking of nature only as nice, a tree here or there for ornamentation. Putting nature back into cities as a fundamental functioning purpose requires the engagement of those engineers, those urban planners, those architects. That is a critical link, I would say. But you know, there are so many other ologies. I think it takes many knowledges to drive our 21st century solutions forward. By the way, one other comment on that. We even have silos in the natureologies. That is, biologists not necessarily talking to a geologist, an oceanographer, et cetera, and finding ways to have truly interdisciplinary research remains challenging. We have a lot of institutions that have created platforms for multiple participants from different entities, but they don't necessarily actually do collaborative interdisciplinary science. And that is really an important this generation need. Yes, here.
Right here.
We've engaged on a bit of a grand adventure where we have purchased a old Girl Scout summer camp, 85 acres, about 10 miles north of the border in the Rio Grande Valley. And we've had 18,000 of our students come through the property in the hopes of educating on the importance of the outdoor education and biology, and just 90% of our kids are from low-income backgrounds, and this is often the first chance they've had to disengage with their PlayStation and re-engage with, you know, turtles and the environment that's around them on the border. And I'm curious what advice you might have for us as we move forward and try to anticipate how we can partner with others and build a place that's really going to help our kids' learning. Thank you.
So first of all, congratulations for doing that. That sort of effort is so needed. You know, there's a thirst. You saw the book Last Child in the Woods by Richard Luov mentioned, and the kind of efflorescence of organizations that have sprung from that to try and connect children and nature. I will say, again, drawing from my experience at the Interior Department, one of the biggest challenges is something as prosaic as transportation. We found that the national parks or wildlife refuges or state parks often are very eager, very willing to get kids into nature. But simple things like, how are they going to get there? The transportation system to get them there, paying for that, was sometimes a barrier. You know, I'll tell another little story, and it has to do with my daughter. My daughter taught at an inner city school in East Oakland in California, an exceedingly disadvantaged area. And she wanted to take her kids to the Golden Gate National Recreation Area for a walk in Muir Woods. And once having figured out how to transcend the transportation problem, she began talking to the kids about going to the woods. And the children said, "But we don't want to go. We're afraid. Aren't there wild animals? Won't we get lost? It's frightening." So she entered a conversation with the kids. These kids in East Oakland, many of them said they had never walked on a surface other than asphalt or sidewalk, ever. These kids in East Oakland had never seen the Golden Gate Bridge a few miles away. And so when we think about connecting in particular disadvantaged communities and some of the kinds of children that you're serving, in some respects, the challenge to us is not just finding ways to get children to nature, but to try and bring them comfort in the places where they are, a familiarization with nature, so that then they want to spread their wings and explore more. And that's why that urban greening and investment in parks in cities becomes so important, so that these kids have it right in their backyard.
Thank you, Lynn. I wanted to extend a very big thank you to Lynn for making it all the way down here to Texas. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you.
Tina.